This photo seemed to show a wealthy family, but zooming in on the slave revealed a dark secret. The photograph arrived at the Historical Society of Charleston in a worn leather portfolio, donated by an estate sale coordinator who barely glanced at its contents. Margaret Hayes, a preservation specialist, carefully lifted the sepia-toned image from its protective sleeve. The photo showed what appeared to be a prosperous family from the 1850s. A stern-looking man in a dark suit, a woman in an elaborate silk dress, and 3 children arranged on the front steps of a grand columned mansion. The image seemed unremarkable at first. Another portrait of Southern wealth before the Civil War. Margaret had catalogued dozens like it, but something made her pause. The composition felt deliberate, almost staged, with an unusual amount of empty space at the bottom of the frame. She placed the photograph under the digital microscope and adjusted the magnification. As she zoomed toward the lower right corner, her breath caught. There, barely visible in the original print, but now unmistakable, was a figure. A young black woman stood partially hidden behind a pillar, her face turned slightly away from the camera as if trying to remain unseen. Unlike the family members posed proudly in the center, this woman's posture suggested she hadn't been meant to be part of the photograph at all. Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she increased the magnification further. The woman wore a simple dark dress with no adornments, her hair covered with a plain cloth. But what struck Margaret most was her expression, captured in that brief, accidental moment, a look of profound sadness mixed with something else. Fear? Resignation? The discovery changed everything. This wasn't just another family portrait. This was evidence of something much more complex, a story that demanded to be uncovered. Margaret immediately photographed the enlarged section and sent it to her colleague, Dr. James Richardson, a historian specializing in antebellum South Carolina. Within hours, he arrived at the Historical Society, his usual composure replaced by barely contained excitement. "Do you understand what you've found?" James asked, leaning over the microscope. Enslaved people were rarely photographed. When they were, it was usually as props to demonstrate wealth. But this woman wasn't supposed to be in the frame at all. They examined the portfolio more carefully. Tucked behind the photograph was a fragile newspaper clipping from 1856, announcing the marriage of Mr. Robert Whitfield to Miss Catherine Morrison, uniting 2 of Charleston's most distinguished families. The photo had been their wedding portrait. Margaret began researching the Whitfield family in census records and property documents. Robert Whitfield had owned a rice plantation 20 miles outside Charleston and maintained a townhouse on Meeting Street, the mansion in the photograph. According to the 1850 census, he had claimed ownership of 43 enslaved people. But names were rarely recorded for the enslaved. They appeared only as numbers, ages, and gender in the slaveholders' property lists. Finding the identity of the woman in the photograph seemed impossible. James suggested they examine the photo more thoroughly. Under magnification, they discovered something extraordinary. The woman wore a small pendant around her neck, barely visible but distinct. It appeared to be a simple metal circle with markings inside. "If we can identify that pendant," James said quietly, "we might be able to trace her story. Some enslaved people carried small tokens, gifts from family members, or secret symbols of resistance. This could be our only clue." Margaret felt the weight of responsibility settle over her. This wasn't just historical research anymore. This was about restoring a voice to someone history had tried to erase. The next morning, Margaret and James drove to the old Charleston Library, where colonial-era documents were preserved in climate-controlled vaults. The librarian, an elderly woman named Ruth, listened to their request with interest. "You're looking for records of domestic slaves in the Whitfield household?" Ruth asked, pulling a ring of keys from her desk drawer. Most families didn't keep detailed records, but the Whitfields were meticulous. "Follow me." She led them down a narrow staircase into the archives. Dust particles floated in the dim light as Ruth pulled out several leather-bound ledgers. "These are household accounts from the 1850s. If your woman worked in the house, she might appear here." Margaret carefully opened the first ledger. The pages contained endless columns of numbers, expenditures for fabric, food, furniture, and services. Then, on page 47, she found something different, a list of names. Hannah, kitchen. Sarah, nursery. Grace, laundry. Eliza, lady's maid. The list continued with 15 names total, the domestic slaves who had worked inside the Whitfield townhouse. Unlike the field workers, these individuals had been valuable enough to warrant recording by name, but there were no descriptions, no ages, no additional details that might help identify the woman in the photograph. James photographed each page, while Margaret cross-referenced the names with other documents. Then Ruth returned with another discovery. "I found something in the city records. There was a legal dispute in 1857 involving the Whitfield estate. Catherine Whitfield accused a neighbor of attempting to purchase her lady's maid Eliza without permission. The complaint includes a physical description for identification purposes." Margaret's pulse quickened as Ruth placed the document before them. The description read, "Female, approximately 20 years of age, medium height, distinctive circular pendant worn at all times, gift from her mother before separation." They had found her. The woman in the photograph was Eliza. With Eliza's name confirmed, Margaret and James expanded their search. They discovered that Catherine Whitfield's personal correspondence had been preserved by the South Carolina Historical Society. The letters, written to her sister in Virginia, provided a glimpse into the household dynamics. In a letter dated May 1856, Catherine wrote, "Eliza remains the most competent of my servants, though I confess she possesses a stubborn disposition that requires frequent correction. She performs her duties adequately, but maintains an unsettling silence, as if her thoughts are perpetually elsewhere." Another letter from December 1856 revealed more. "Eliza appeared distressed this morning, though she would not speak of it. I later learned from Robert that her brother had been sold to a cotton broker from Georgia. She requested permission to say farewell, which I granted, though Robert thought me too lenient." The letters painted a picture of a young woman trapped in an impossible situation, serving a mistress who viewed her simultaneously as valuable property and as something less than human. Margaret felt the historical distance collapse as she read Catherine's casual mentions of Eliza's suffering. James found additional records in the Charleston slave market archives. In 1848, a woman named Ruth and her two children, Eliza, age 12, and Samuel, age 9, had been sold to Robert Whitfield's father. The family had been separated when the father died in 1852, with Ruth being sold to a family in North Carolina, while Eliza and Samuel remained with Robert. "The pendant," Margaret said suddenly. In the legal description, it mentioned the pendant was from her mother before separation. Eliza had been wearing her mother's gift for at least 4 years when this photograph was taken. It was her only connection to Ruth. They sat in silence, the weight of that realization settling between them. The photograph had captured not just a moment, but a story of survival, loss, and quiet resistance. To understand why Eliza appeared in the photograph, Margaret and James reconstructed the events of the Whitfield wedding day. Period newspapers described it as the social event of the season, with 200 guests attending a ceremony at St. Michael's Episcopal Church, followed by a reception at the Meeting Street townhouse. Contemporary accounts mentioned that the couple had commissioned a prominent photographer, Samuel Barnwell, to create a formal portrait. In the 1850s, photography was expensive and time-consuming. Subjects had to remain perfectly still for 30 to 40 seconds while the image was captured. "Eliza wasn't supposed to be there," James explained, examining the photograph again. "Look at the family's positioning. They're centered and formal, but Eliza is at the edge, partially hidden. She was probably preparing something inside the house and stepped out at the wrong moment." Margaret found a crucial detail in Catherine's letters. The photographer arrived precisely at 3 o'clock, though Robert insisted on delaying for the light. "We arranged ourselves on the steps, while servants ensured everything appeared perfect." The timing made sense now. Eliza had likely been moving between the house and the reception area, ensuring the event proceeded smoothly. For just a moment she had been caught in the frame, an unintended witness to a celebration that symbolized everything she had lost. But Margaret noticed something else in Eliza's expression under extreme magnification. Her face wasn't turned away in deference. She was looking at something, or someone, beyond the camera's view. Her expression held not just sadness, but a kind of focused intensity. She was looking at her brother, Margaret said suddenly. "Samuel. He must have been there too, somewhere outside the frame." The letter mentioned he was sold in December 1856, 6 months after this photo. This might have been one of the last times they were together. The photograph had captured a moment of connection that the Whitfields never knew existed. Margaret became obsessed with understanding the pendant. She contacted Dr. Lisa Chen, an anthropologist who specialized in material culture of enslaved communities. Lisa arrived from Columbia with reference materials and a portable examination kit. Under Lisa's expert analysis, the pendant revealed itself to be more complex than initially thought. "This isn't just a simple ornament," Lisa explained, using a jeweler's loop. "See these markings inside the circle? They're Adinkra symbols from West Africa. This one represents Sankofa, the idea of reaching back to move forward, learning from the past." The discovery was profound. Eliza's mother, Ruth, had given her daughter not just a token of affection, but a deliberate symbol of cultural identity and resistance. In a system designed to strip enslaved people of their heritage, Ruth had ensured her daughter carried something that connected her to their ancestors. Lisa photographed the pendant from multiple angles and compared it with similar artifacts in museum collections. Pendants like this were sometimes created by skilled metalworkers among the enslaved population. They would use discarded materials, broken tools, old coins, and reshape them in secret. The act of creating and wearing these objects was itself a form of resistance. Margaret found a reference in a plantation overseer's journal from 1840, complaining about trinkets and charms worn by enslaved people despite prohibitions. The system had tried to control every aspect of their lives, but small acts of cultural preservation persisted. They now understood that when Eliza stepped into that photograph, she wasn't just wearing her mother's gift. She was carrying a deliberate statement of identity, a reminder that she was more than property, that she belonged to a culture and family that predated her enslavement. The Whitfields had never noticed the pendant, never understood its significance. But Eliza had known. Every day she had worn that symbol against her skin, a quiet act of defiance. Determining what happened to Eliza's brother Samuel became crucial to understanding the full story. James spent weeks searching through slave trader records, bills of sale, and plantation ledgers across South Carolina and Georgia. He finally found the transaction in a dusty ledger book at the Georgia Historical Society, December 12, 1856. Received from R. Whitfield, one Negro boy, Samuel, age 17, healthy and suitable for field work. Paid sum of $900. Transferred to Oakwood Plantation, Burke County, Georgia. The buyer was a cotton planter named Thomas Crawford, known for running one of the harshest operations in the region. Samuel had been sold from relatively privileged domestic work in Charleston to brutal field labor in rural Georgia. Margaret discovered something heartbreaking in Catherine Whitfield's correspondence. In January 1857, she wrote, "Eliza has become increasingly melancholic since her brother's departure. She performs her duties mechanically, but with no spirit. Robert insists I maintain discipline, but I confess the change in her demeanor troubles me." What Catherine interpreted as melancholy was grief, the profound loss of the last family connection Eliza had. The wedding photograph, taken 6 months before Samuel's sale, now represented something even more precious, evidence that they had once been together. James found one more crucial document, a letter from Thomas Crawford to Robert Whitfield dated March 1857. "The boy Samuel you sold me has proven unsatisfactory. He attempted to escape twice, the second time nearly reaching the Savannah River before capture. I have applied appropriate discipline and trust there will be no further incidents." Samuel had tried to run, tried to return to his sister. Margaret felt tears stinging her eyes as she read the cold, businesslike language describing unimaginable suffering. "He never stopped fighting," James said quietly. "Even after they separated him from Eliza, he tried to get back to her. That's courage." The outbreak of the Civil War in 1861 transformed Charleston and the Whitfield household. Margaret traced what happened to Eliza through fragmentary records and newspaper accounts. As Union forces began blockading Charleston's harbor in 1862, the Whitfield family relocated to their plantation outside the city. Catherine's letters described the move. "We departed with only essential servants. Eliza, of course, accompanied us as I cannot manage without her assistance, but the plantation proved no refuge. By 1863, Union forces controlled the coastal islands, and enslaved people began escaping to freedom behind Union lines. The Combahee River Raid in June 1863, led by Harriet Tubman, liberated more than 700 enslaved people from nearby plantations. Margaret found a reference in Union Army records. Among the people who reached Union camps at Port Royal Island in July 1863 was a woman named Eliza, approximately 27 years old, who had escaped from a plantation near Charleston. She wore a distinctive pendant and requested help locating her brother, last known to be in Georgia. "She made it," Margaret whispered, reading the document 3 times to be certain. "Eliza escaped to freedom." The Union records showed that Eliza had been interviewed by Reverend Mansfield French, a missionary working with formerly enslaved people. His notes indicated, "This woman shows remarkable intelligence and determination. She wishes to travel to Georgia to find her brother, but understands the dangers. I have advised patience." James discovered that the Union Army's Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands kept records of people searching for separated family members after the war. Thousands of formerly enslaved people placed advertisements in newspapers, seeking lost relatives. In the September 1865 edition of the colored Tennessean newspaper, they found it. Information wanted of Samuel, last known to be at Oakwood Plantation, Burke County, Georgia, before the war. He would now be about 26 years old. Any information should be directed to Eliza Freeman, Port Royal, South Carolina. Eliza had taken Freeman as her surname, a declaration of her new status. Finding out whether Eliza ever located Samuel became Margaret's consuming focus. She expanded her search to Freedmen's Bureau records, church registries, and post-war census data across South Carolina and Georgia. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A small African Methodist Episcopal church in Augusta, Georgia, had preserved marriage records from 1866. Among them was an entry for Samuel Whitfield, formerly enslaved, age 26, married to Clara Johnson at Union Chapel, June 3, 1866. Witnesses, Reverend Thomas Carter and Eliza Freeman. Margaret sat back in her chair, overwhelmed by emotion. They had found each other. Against impossible odds, separated by hundreds of miles and years of war, Eliza and Samuel had reunited. Further research revealed that Samuel had escaped from Oakwood Plantation in early 1865 during Sherman's march through Georgia and made his way to Augusta, where he worked as a carpenter. When Eliza's advertisement appeared in the newspaper, someone who knew Samuel brought it to his attention. Church records indicated that Eliza remained in Augusta after Samuel's wedding, living in a small community of formerly enslaved families near the Savannah River. The 1870 census listed Eliza Freeman, age 34, domestic worker, literate. She had learned to read and write in freedom. James found one more precious document, a letter from Samuel to the Freedmen's Bureau in 1867, requesting assistance in obtaining property. In the letter, he mentioned my sister Eliza, who never gave up searching for me, and who wears still the pendant our mother gave her before we were separated. That symbol of Sankofa, going back to retrieve what was lost, is what brought us together again. The pendant had witnessed everything: separation, enslavement, escape, and finally, reunion. The small circle of metal with its adinkra symbol had traveled with Eliza from childhood through her years of bondage and into freedom. Margaret organized an exhibition at the Historical Society titled Unseen Lives, Stories Hidden in Plain Sight. The Whitfield wedding photograph became the centerpiece, displayed with extensive context about Eliza's life, Samuel's survival, and their eventual reunion. The exhibition included the enlarged image showing Eliza in the corner, alongside reproductions of documents tracing her journey. The pendant received its own display case, identified as Symbol of Resistance and Family Connection, c. 1848. Descendants of the Whitfield family attended the opening, some uncomfortable with this new interpretation of their ancestors' photograph, but others expressed appreciation for the fuller, more honest history. More importantly, Margaret had contacted historians working on African American genealogy, hoping to find Eliza's descendants. Through careful research, tracking the Freeman and Whitfield families in South Carolina and Georgia, they identified a woman named Patricia Thompson living in Atlanta, whose great-great-grandmother had been named Eliza. Patricia traveled to Charleston for the exhibition. Standing before the photograph, seeing Eliza's face enlarged and honored for the first time, she wept. I always heard family stories about an ancestor who wore a special pendant and who was separated from her mother and brother during slavery. But we never had proof, never had images. Now here she is. The exhibition attracted national attention. Major newspapers covered the story of the photograph's hidden figure and the subsequent research that revealed Eliza's remarkable life. Scholars began examining other historical photographs more carefully, wondering what other stories might be lurking in corners and margins, deliberately or accidentally preserved. For Margaret, the project had transformed from academic research into something deeply personal. The photograph that had seemed unremarkable now stood as testament to both the cruelty of slavery and the unbreakable bonds of family and identity. Eliza had been meant to remain invisible, a footnote to someone else's wedding portrait. Instead, her accidental presence in that frame had preserved her story for future generations. The pendant's message of Sankofa, reaching back to move forward, had proven prophetic. By recovering this hidden history, Margaret had helped ensure that Eliza and the millions like her would not be forgotten. The photograph still showed a wealthy family on their wedding day. But now, everyone who looked at it saw Eliza first. Her quiet dignity, her silent resistance, and her ultimate triumph over a system that had tried to erase her humanity.